Pep Guardiola is having a rough January along with Manchester City. This doesn't feel like a typical January kind of winter slide. This might be even worse. Let's talk about why that is. And also, I got one thing that still, as an Arsenal fan, gets me a little worried.
It's looking really bad, but I think Pep has not replaced the players that he has lost, and this is why they're in the slump.
I mean, they spent a lot of money, but I think it's something different. I think it's actually more about Pep than it is about the players on the pitch.
Interesting. I'll start with the fact that I'll go to Erling Haaland's comments after the loss against Bodo Glimt, right? It's a fairly embarrassing loss for Manchester City, even though it is away. Even though Bodo Glimt has had some pretty good results these last two Champions League seasons. So,
but to quote a tweet that I saw, Manchester City lost to a Wi-Fi password.
Sure, I was thinking like they lost to someone's pronouns.
Yeah,
Bodo / Glimt. But the fact that Erling Haaland was focused on, he took a lot of responsibility, and he was sort of blaming the other veterans on the team for this loss. I mean, I don't know if you saw, obviously Declan Rice got a yellow card in the game against Inter, and he's going to miss the game against Kairat.
Oh no.
And right. And some people are like, he came on just to get that yellow he can miss that game. But Bernardo Silva also not in this game, and there's a sort of thought because of yellow card accumulation, or did he get a red? I don't know exactly, but he's out suspended for this game. And then it's like, all right, did they really underestimate or really not think that this would be much of a match for them?
Do you think Manchester City should need Bernardo Silva to beat Bodo Glimt?
I think they, as far as veteran leadership, they do need that on the pitch. And Bernardo Silva is obviously in a little bit of a decline. He's not the same player he was 3-4 years ago, but the not having Kevin De Bruyne, obviously Rodri being out for so long, and now he's back, but he picks up 2 yellows in mere seconds. There's and this happens with sort of every team, but the leadership is kind of missing. On top of the fact that, look, the injuries. I mean, you also can't forget about that. Manchester City has so many injuries. They played 2 center backs, one, I believe 20 years old, the other 21 years old. So it's not too much of a shock of the result.
I can understand. And one of the things that stands out from this is the longest trophy drought since Pep's arrival, because they haven't won anything since they won the league in 2023, 2024, which, most clubs, it wouldn't even be a part of the consideration. Of course we haven't won since 2023, 2024. We won the league that year, and now it's like a big deal, right? I think when it comes down to it, to me, this is a signal that the Pep we've known, and if you go back 3-4 years ago, Manchester City playing their B squad and even down a man probably beat Bodo Glimt. And you probably don't, or maybe draw. I can understand the idea of the leadership being missing, but I think it's actually more of an issue of Pep himself and the tactics, not so much the players on the pitch. Let me explain. Because when you look at his tactics, what we've seen in the past is Pep Guardiola changes the game, right? The false 9 and everything happening in Barcelona. When he goes to Bayern Munich, everyone has to adjust to him. When he goes to Manchester City, everyone has to adjust to him. And then you have all people hiring, Pepites and all the coaches that learned under Pep, Arteta, Enzo Maresca, all these other coaches. De Zerbi to some degree, everyone's like, oh, is he a little bit of a Pep? And then what you start to see is, wait, Arteta's starting to shift. Maresca's starting to shift. De Zerbi, his time in the Premier League shift. Andoni Iraola over at Bournemouth, they start shifting the way the tactics are, responding to the possession game with, all right, we're going to man mark you, and we're going to do these things that defensively are going to disrupt what you do. You saw Mikel Arteta every year after year have to adjust what he does, because you know what? The tactics that we were deploying 5, 6, 7 years ago just aren't as effective or aren't as efficient as they were before, because defenses have learned how to deal with this, and you've gotten players that can handle the defensive responsibilities. So now all of a sudden Pep isn't changing and adapting. He's not the one that's leading the pack. He now has to be the one that's adapting. He needs to be the one that's changing. He said himself after the game, the tactics just aren't working like they used to. He's like, and I believe his quote was that the players were fragile. And part of me you don't hear him really talk like this very often. And when you do, usually it's a bit more pointed, but there's a slight defeated nature to the tone he's using that you don't very often find. He's usually a bit more defiant. And maybe it's the years of, the amount of football that he's had to manage, and his wife leaving him because he swore he wasn't going to go back. And then
she went back to him.
She did. They're back together. But that's also why part of the reason why he's like, hey, maybe I'm done after this season. The promise that he made, if we're going to believe what's in the reports, is that he was going to be done. And this overwhelming, maybe that he hasn't had the time to sort of figure out the new thing that everyone has to adjust to. He now has to adjust to what everyone has figured out the new thing is. And he hasn't done that yet. And to me, I think back to like when Erling Haaland first got to Manchester City, he would make in runs behind and no one would pass him the ball, or not often, because the tactic was pass short, keep possession, marginally make your way up the pitch, get defenses out of position. Now he's like, all right, go long. We don't need Ederson to hit you on a dime. Go long. We'll figure it out. All right, kick it into space. Erling Haaland will get it. He's bigger and faster than everybody. He'll muscle any defender off of it. And it kind of worked. I mean, he's scoring buckets of goals. That's not a tactic we've seen him have before. And him just being like, whatever, I don't know, root one it for every once in a while. These things have me realizing Pep not everyone's looking at him going, all right, what's he doing? Because we need to figure it out. He's doing that to other coaches now. And these are coaches that, for the most part, came from him.
I mean, but what is the alternative? Would you say, if you had the opportunity to get Erling Haaland on your team, do you say no? Because he's going to force you to play
I'm not saying that. What I'm simply saying is the tactics that we understood, Pep Guardiola having before, being the everything shifts, everything changes because Pep said, we're doing this now and everyone has to figure that out. That's not the world we live in now. You know what I mean? And I think a good example of that is just going along to playing to his strengths, like an Erling Haaland versus Erling Haaland needs to understand what we're doing. He's coming here to figure it out. Yo, when you've got a machine, use the machine. You know what I mean? You got a Ferrari, you drive a little bit fast. Don't just go pick up groceries. But overall, I think the slump we're seeing isn't so much the players are tired or we don't have leadership. Those are all important parts of it, right? Congestion and calendar and match fixtures, all those things are all important. I think what we're also seeing is Pep Guardiola not being the leader of the tactical shifts in the world of and the game of football like we saw in the past. I think we're seeing him have to figure out a way to adapt to teams that have kind of figured out his tactics, and he hasn't changed fast enough.
I mean, this is all. I don't agree with that, mainly because he has this sort of run, at every team he's been at. Like it works in the beginning, and you have a lot of success, and then it can't work forever. I mean, that's every coach says this about every player that they coach and any team that they manage, that the message just doesn't sink in.
But it's not necessarily that. I mean, think back to the changes he's made even since he's been at Manchester City. A major tactical shift was John Stones running the ball forward and how good he was with the ball at his feet. He didn't need a defensive midfielder to sit back and wait for the pressure. His center back could take it forward. Okay, defenses figure that out. Next thing, putting a center back as your left back and having him venture forward and being nearly at the wing. Gavardio, where this guy's scoring goals out of nowhere, where this guy was a center back. That's okay. Now we need to shift. Oh, okay. You're going to have center backs roaming in this area. Sure. Now we need to shift. He's always found a way to shift the culture versus now the culture has shifted without him. In a way, it's not a major shift, but it's a slight shift where he's not the leader of the pack anymore. The pack has moved ahead of him in a way. And I think that's a part of this. And I don't know if it comes from maybe his personal life or he's just like gassed or exhausted. It feels like he's just like, I just can't keep reinventing football. I just need to sit back. But there's a fear that he's not adapted fast enough, and Manchester City is now going to suffer in a way like they haven't had a trophy in a while.
Sure.
They're going to suffer in a way. But remember I said that there was like a little thing that still got me scared.
I've been on the edge of my seat. I can't wait.
Well, then welcome. Everyone else in their cars parked on the highway with the blinkers on, just waiting to hear what I have to say. Every once in a while, Pep Guardiola, his team goes through a little bit of a slump, right? It's a little dangerous, but every once in a while they go through a slump. And he's just like, I told these guys they're not as good as they think they are. And we need to try hard and work harder. And what happens is it awakens the monster, right? The season where they caught up to Arsenal and beat Arsenal, was that 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken? Before Liverpool won it. Again, it feels like it's a little bit of a rope-a-dope. It feels like Manchester City and Pep Guardiola are trying to find a new way to inspire his team. And maybe it's having some of these lackluster matches, a couple draws in January and a big loss against Bodo Glimt. Now's the perfect time for them to take on that second half of the season run that they seem to always find. I know they didn't last year, but they seem to always find where they can turn it on. And next thing you know, it's 3 points after 3 points after 3 points. And every other team above them starts to slip little by little, draws. And before you know it, Manchester City wins the league.
Sure.
And maybe that's just a paranoid Arsenal fan.
You're just like a whiny Arsenal fan.
Not whiny.
Just like
PTSD, because I've seen it before,
You're just
man.
worried about the worst. I mean, look, look, there are clear problems, and the bigger issues are the slew of injuries. The players missing for Manchester City are really the kind of staple pieces to implement whatever tactics that Pep Guardiola wants to have.
They didn't lose to Real Madrid. They lost to Bodo Glimt, and that's no disrespect to Bodo Glimt.
But they have two children at center back.
That never mattered before. The first time we saw it was Roger coming out, seemed to have collapsed the Jenga. You know what I mean? But that was 1 season ago at this point.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about what they have to. Manchester City finds the greatest of the greatest players.
Sure.
This isn't Aston Villa, who they're great but then they get thinner. They should have 2 11s. The fact that they signed that they brought up a bunch of young players shouldn't mean anything when you're playing Bodo Glimt.
I mean, look, it's a Champions League club. I mean,
but that used to not be competition for them.
Yes, but that's credit to a lot of the sort of quote unquote underground teams in Champions League that we don't pay a lot of attention to are getting better and able to compete. They normally play against cities, Arsenal's, Real Madrid, and they get absolutely washed. They get humiliated in their stadiums, and now things are changing.
Which I'm happy about.
The Champions League games are getting a little bit more competitive.
But that, I think it says a lot about Bodo Glimt and how much being a part of this competition has elevated their game. Absolutely. I think it also says a lot about where Manchester City is right now. And they're not the Manchester City of old. They're now in that tier A. They're fighting for an 8th spot, if I'm not mistaken. I haven't looked at the standings, right? Manchester City.
Yeah, they're like pretty at the bottom of the table. At the bottom, as far as
the getting the bye.
Yeah.
That's not the Manchester City of old. Manchester City of old, they'd be top of whatever group they were in, because obviously there was an elite
Champions
phase.
League season, they barely made it.
Bad. That was a bad year last year, which I think also is a point on my part of the argument.
So look, it's as far as it's results like this that obviously have you questioning whether Pep is going to stay. Did he sign a contract for 1 more year?
I think his contract runs out after 1 more year, but I think the rumor is that he's not.
Yeah, look, does he look as happy to coach Manchester City as in the past? No, he does not. But there are a lot of elements. Again, the injuries and the players that are there, like Ryan Cherky over Kevin De Bruyne, who is effectively filling that role, is he's not the same, right? I mean, it's like Kevin De Bruyne is a better player. Cherky has glimpses of like absolute brilliance, and I think he could get there.
Yeah, but I think that says a lot about Pep Guardiola. Maybe it's just the players available, but Pep Guardiola going out and finding a maverick, in place of a Kevin De Bruyne, which was not really the maverick. Had it in him, certainly can take over a match if he wanted to, but that guy understood the system better than anyone else and would make the right pass, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Where you got Ryan Cherky, who's like, I know you want me to do ABC, but how about I do XYZ right now? and Reinders is kind of a similar. Semenyo also has that in him. The types of players he's bringing in aren't your typical Pep players.
I don't know what that means. What's a typical Pep player?
Like someone who's willing to follow the system within in and out. I don't see that in Reinders and Cherky and Semenyo. These are players that will, if they find open space, can dribble and make their own play, if you will. You know what I mean? And they're mavericks. They're magic makers. Kind of the reason why people thought Grealish wasn't working, because Grealish is like, how about I do something really cool right now, as opposed to do the and look, back then it didn't work, and now these are the types of players they're trying to bring in.
Sure. I mean, I don't know. I don't necessarily agree with everything you just said about the profile of these players. But I will say that this is every dynasty is bound to crumble. Like, it's not going to last forever. You enjoy it while you have it, and new players come in.
I like this poems by Christian.
New players come in. Semenyo, Mark Gay, they need Gay. They need just a functional center back because they don't have enough healthy center backs. So this is what used to work in the past is not working now. So he has to find some way to adapt to the adversity that he's currently facing. So I look, do I feel bad for Manchester City or do I feel bad for Pep Guardiola? No, not at all. They've had plenty of success, but this is my main question. And after that game against Bodo Glimt, I'm like, hey, maybe Pep is done. That's really where my mind is at. I'm like, maybe he's just done. Maybe he needs a new challenge. Maybe he just needs new people to talk to.
Well, Mark Gay's a new person to talk to,
And
right?
We'll see how that works.
We'll see how that works. I wonder what his new role will be.
Well, we know Crystal Palace is collapsing because Glasner looks like he's having a very public feud with ownership.
As they got out right at the last moment.
All right. But best of luck to Manchester City. Just the tiny little club.
They need it. They really need it. Hey,
needs-
shouts to Bodo Glimt, man. I hope none of their fans got offended by what we were talking about here.